Okay, so this video is about the two topics, sustainability and the 6 R's. Okay, the 6 R's being very much related to sustainability and the environment. So what basically is sustainability? Well, it's ensuring effectively that the materials and the energy that we use today is going to be available for a long time in the future for our children, our children's children, and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, what we need to make sure that to ensure that things are sustainable, obviously, is sort of one of two things. Either there's one way of looking at this in the fact that items to be sustainable need to last a long period of time, so their kind of working life is very long. We make items that are durable, that last, okay, and that as a responsible designer is something that we want to be thinking about, okay. The other sort of factors is after the end of life of this product, how do we then reclaim some of that material or that energy to make the product more sustainable, okay. So how can we make products be more sustainable? Well, if we think about the 6 R's effectively, these are ways that we can effectively improve sustainability. So the 6 R's, to try and remember them, are renew, recycle, repair, rethink, refuse and reuse. Okay, some of these are very easy to get mixed up, okay, but I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about the definitions, and by proxy obviously you'll know a little bit about how these aid sustainability in general. Okay, so if we start with the first one, which is renew. Okay, now renew means we are collecting material or energy from a source that is renewable. Okay, now if we're talking about energy, first of all, we all know that certain fuels such as coal, oil and gas are a finite source, which basically means that they are going to run out. Okay, now if we think about things that don't run out, okay, these are renewable sources. Okay, so if we talk about infinite or infinite resources such as the sun, the wind, tidal power, hydroelectric power, geothermal, okay, these are all sources that you may have heard from in geography, which are basically not going to run out, at least not in the near future. Okay, now if we think about materials and materials that are renewable, okay, we are trying to, it's easiest to think about renewable materials are things that can grow. Okay, so if you're trying to think of a list of renewable materials, you want to think, can I grow this item? Okay, examples, if we talk about resistant materials, things that you can grow very simply are trees. Okay, trees basically form paper and they form wood or timber as well. Okay, other examples of naturally renewable materials are things like rubbers, which obviously come from rubber trees, which again is a renewable resource. Okay, basically again, if it can't be grown, then it's not renewable. Okay, if we think about in the textiles environment, there is a whole array of renewable sources. Okay, so if we think about certain things can come from animal protein, so if we think of maybe sheep as a source of wool, or if we think about silkworm as a source of silk products as well, these can be grown and therefore are renewable. If we think of the more cellulose-based fabrics such as cotton and linen, cotton obviously comes from a cotton plant and linen comes from the flax plant. So again, these are renewable sources. If we talk about food technology, there's basically the majority of what we use is renewable, whether it be flour, butter, milk, whatever. They are all are going to be renewable resources. In terms of certain examples, I mean even in terms of meat and things like this, if it can be grown, it is renewable. Okay, so that is renewable. We can grow the product, we can get it from a source that's not going to run out and therefore sustainable in that sense. Okay, now the second topic on the 6 R's is recycle. Okay, this is often confused with other topics, but to be very clear about recycle, what you are doing is at the end of a product's life cycle or a material's life cycle, what we're going to do if we're going to recycle it is we are going to first break it down into its existing material. So if we start off with, for example, an aluminium can, okay, if we want to recycle that aluminium can, what we're first going to do probably is melt that product down or crush it and melt it down, and then we're going to reform that product into another usable product. So you may have seen the adverts on the telly where they take a baked bean can or something and that turns into a panel on an aircraft or a car or something like that. That is recycling. You break the item down into its bare material and then you reform it or structure it in a different way into a different product. Okay, the third one on the list, which is repair, is quite straightforward really. It means fixing something, so it has a longer life cycle, a longer shelf life. It's going to sustain itself for a longer period of time, and this can be linked quite closely to the maintenance of objects. Okay, so if we talk about a bike that we purchase from a shop, if we choose not to repair the bike, we don't maintain the bike by oiling the chain or pumping up the tyres or replacing some of the sort of consumable parts on the product, effectively we are lowering its sustainability as an item. If we're basically saying as soon as the chain breaks, I'm just going to throw it on the rubbish pile, we are not helping the sustainability of these sort of items, because we're saying we want to go out and buy another bike or another car or something like that by not maintaining it. The fourth one on the list is the idea of rethink. Okay, now this is normally coming from the point of view of the designer. If I'm going to rethink my designs, I can make the product more sustainable in that way. So if we go back to an example of maybe a can again, okay, if there was a way that I can reduce the amount of materials being used, then that is obviously going to improve the sustainability. Or if I can use materials that maybe don't require so much power to process the material, then this could prove useful. Okay, now one example that's come up in the recent exam paper is the packaging of milk products. Okay, so if we talk about milk containers, quite a lot nowadays they're moving over to a very thin plastic bag, which obviously uses a lot less material than in the past, where we maybe use glass bottles or plastic bottles that require a great deal of energy through heat and therefore often from fossil fuels to actually recycle that product down. But what we're basically saying is if we can reduce the amount of material, or we can even maybe rethink and take that material from a more sustainable source, perhaps even cellulose based packaging like cornstarch or something like that, it's going to really reduce that strain on the environment and improve the sustainability of the item. Fifth on the list is refuse. Okay, and it means just that, saying no. Okay, one clear example of this, which is advocated by a lot of supermarkets nowadays, is they ask you for a plastic bag. They do not just start packaging up your items. Now it is your responsibility perhaps as a consumer to say, well, do I actually need this product? Okay, back in your parents' days, back in the earlier days in the society, it was very common to walk to the shops with perhaps a bag of your own or a trolley or something like this, so that you could take or transport the items from the supermarket or from the local grocers or something back to your home. Or maybe you went there and you bought small amounts, and this meant you didn't actually require the use of bags. So this is one example where you can refuse to do something to enhance the sustainability. Or maybe as a consumer you say, you know what, I don't want to receive my power from a company that uses fossil fuels such as coal or gas. I'm going to take my fuel from a more responsible manufacturer, such as maybe a solar or a hydroelectric supply or something like that, depending on where on the environment you are. Okay. Finally, the last one on the list is reuse. Now this often gets confused with recycle, but the main difference with reuse is you are not breaking the product down into its bare essentials. What you're effectively doing is taking the item and using it again, but perhaps for a different purpose. So another example, if we go back to the carrier bags, if you have decided you've gone to the supermarket, you've collected a carrier bag and you've taken it home. Once you've emptied the contents of your carrier bag, what can you then reuse that product for? Well, one simple use to increase sustainability is to maybe put it in and use it as a bin bag. Okay, so it's just one simple reuse of an item. So once again, the 6 R's are renew, recycle, repair, rethink, refuse and reuse. Okay, 2 other key topics that we're just going to briefly touch upon are tessellation and nesting. Okay, these are 2 other key things, okay, that we need to know about for sustainability. So if we talk about tessellation, this is a maths term, obviously, you may have covered it in maths, and it is items that when you place them close together, if we think about nets or something like that, it makes sure that the spaces between these items is absolutely zero. So if I was cutting my perhaps laser cutting items out and I produce just simple squares, I can place several squares next to each other. There is no wasted space in between, and therefore I'm making the most use of the item and improving its sustainability. Now At many occasions, obviously, we can't produce items that perfectly slot together, that can't perfectly tessellate, but what we want to do is when we're cutting these items out, or when we're processing these items, whether it be laser cutting or die cutting or something like this, we want to nest the items together, and that simply means placing them very, very close together, such as the eggs in a bird's nest, okay? So they're placed very, very close together, which again saves material.